crab season was canceled this year after billions of crabs disappeared, devastating Alaska's commercial fishing industry and the livelihoods of those who depend on it.
When the shocking discovery behind Deadliest Catch finally came to light, no one could have imagined how deeply it would change the future of the legendary fishing series. For years, fans watched fearless crews battle freezing waters, violent storms, and deadly conditions in the Bering Sea while searching for valuable crab. But behind the scenes, a crisis was growing. From disappearing crab populations to challenges threatening the entire industry, every revelation exposed a reality viewers never saw coming. But what exactly forced Deadliest Catch toward shutdown? This is the story. The crisis that threatened Deadliest Catch. For over 2 decades, Deadliest Catch became known for one dangerous mission: fishermen battling the unforgiving waters of the Bering Sea in search of valuable crab. Every season, millions of viewers watched captains and their crews face freezing temperatures, powerful storms, exhausting working conditions, and moments where one mistake could change everything. The danger was always part of the job. Fishermen knew the ocean could turn deadly without warning, with freezing temperatures, violent storms, and exhausting battles against nature. Yet despite every risk they faced, there was one thing they believed they could always depend on. After years of chasing crab through the Bering Sea, they trusted that the valuable catches would return season after season, until one day, the crabs were suddenly gone. Then, something happened that shocked everyone in the fishing industry. The crabs began disappearing. The very species that supported Alaska's fishing communities and made Deadliest Catch a global television phenomenon were suddenly becoming harder to find. For generations, fishermen had relied on snow crab and red king crab seasons to earn a living, support their families, and maintain their businesses. But as the numbers continued to fall, they faced an unimaginable reality. The valuable crab that shaped their entire way of life might no longer be available. The announcement that followed created a wave of shock across Alaska, the fishing industry, and millions of Deadliest Catch fans worldwide. For the first time in the fishery's history, officials faced an impossible choice. With crab numbers reaching dangerous lows, they were forced to take an unprecedented step: completely cancel the season and hope the population could recover. But this was never just about a television series losing its main storyline. Behind the cameras were real fishermen whose entire lives depended on these waters. Captains had invested millions of dollars into their boats. Crews depended on each season's earnings. Families relied on the dangerous but rewarding profession that had been passed down through generations. The shutdown threatened more than just a season of fishing. It threatened careers, businesses, and a way of life. For Deadliest Catch, the crisis created an unimaginable question: how could a show built around the pursuit of crab survive when the crab itself was disappearing? And beneath this shocking collapse was an even bigger mystery. Deadliest Catch was known for fishermen battling the brutal waters of the Bering Sea in search of valuable crab before it was forced to shut down. But what caused the educational and entertaining show to face this crisis? Was the decision inevitable, or could it have been managed without shutting down? Let's uncover the shocking details. A disaster nobody could ignore. Before the government made the difficult decision to shut down the fishery, scientists had already been watching a disturbing situation unfold beneath the freezing waters of the Bering Sea. Using research vessels, underwater surveys, and advanced tracking equipment, they carefully monitored crab populations and began noticing a decline that was becoming impossible to ignore. The numbers revealed a crisis that shocked even experienced fishermen. Between 2018 and 2021, the snow crab population in the Bering Sea reportedly experienced a shocking collapse, falling from nearly 8 billion crabs to just about 1 billion. In only 3 years, approximately 87% of the population had vanished. For fishermen whose families had relied on these waters for generations, the sudden disappearance was almost impossible to understand. and raised serious fears about the future of the entire industry. The Bering Sea had long been considered one of the most productive crab fishing regions in the world. It supported fishing towns, provided thousands of jobs, and created the dangerous but rewarding lifestyle that made captains from Deadliest Catch famous. For decades, fishermen believed that no matter how difficult the conditions became, the crabs would always return. But suddenly, that confidence began to disappear. Scientists believed the collapse was caused by several connected factors. One of the biggest concerns was the rising temperature of the ocean. Snow crabs survive best in extremely cold environments, and as the Bering Sea became warmer, the conditions they depended on started changing. The warmer waters affected their food sources, movement patterns, and ability to survive. Some crabs may have moved toward colder regions, while others may not have survived the changing environment. However, climate change was not the only concern. Scientists also pointed to years of heavy fishing pressure. Because crabs were highly valuable, large numbers were harvested every season. But when environmental conditions changed, the population could no longer rebuild fast enough. The combination of warmer oceans and intense harvesting created a crisis that could no longer be ignored. For years, fishermen and industry leaders hoped the situation would improve. They believed the crabs would eventually return and normal seasons would continue, but the numbers kept falling. Eventually, the decline became so severe that officials had no choice but to act. The warnings that many hoped would pass had become a reality that would change the future of crab fishing forever. A disturbing decline in the snow crab population, which formed the foundation of Deadliest Catch, was the main reason behind the shutdown. But how thoroughly was the research that led to this decision examined? To what extent did the decision affect the fishermen and their investments? Let's delve into the devastating details. The decision that brought crab industry to a standstill. By 2021, the situation had become too serious for officials to ignore. Scientists and managers from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game reviewed the latest population data and realized the crab numbers had fallen to a dangerous level. The population was no longer strong enough to support normal commercial fishing without causing even more damage. For the first time in the history of the fishery, officials faced a decision that would change the lives of thousands of people. They had no choice. The season had to be canceled. On October 6, 2022, Alaska officials and the National Marine Fisheries Service made the announcement that shocked the fishing world. The snow crab and red king crab seasons for the 2022 to 2023 period would be completely closed. The news immediately sent fear throughout Alaska's fishing communities. For the captains and crews featured on Deadliest Catch, this was not simply a disappointing year with fewer opportunities. It threatened the entire foundation of their careers. Their boats, businesses, and lifestyles had been built around these famous crab fisheries. Red king crab had long been one of the most valuable catches of the season. Snow crab was another major source of income that supported fishing families and entire communities. Without these opportunities, captains suddenly faced questions they had never expected to answer. How would they continue paying their crews? How would they cover the enormous costs of maintaining million-dollar fishing vessels? How could they survive when the very resource they had spent decades chasing was suddenly unavailable? Captains like Sig Hansen of the Northwestern and Wild Bill Witrowski were among those forced to rethink everything. These fishermen had spent years perfecting their skills, studying specific waters, and building their reputations around catching specific crab species. They knew the risks of the ocean. They knew how dangerous the job could be. But this was a challenge they could not fight with experience alone. The shutdown showed that even the most skilled fishermen in the world could not control the forces of nature. The ocean had changed, and the rules they had followed for decades were no longer the same. For Deadliest Catch, the crisis became bigger than television. The show was built around the dangerous pursuit of crab. But now, the very thing that made the series famous was disappearing. Beyond the shutdown of Deadliest Catch costing fishermen their careers and investments, what other efforts did they make when they were prevented from hunting red king crab? And were they able to sustain the same famous Deadliest Catch, or were they forced to explore alternative options? Now, let's unravel how Deadliest Catch survived when the crabs were gone. An unimaginable challenge after the crabs disappeared. When the crab season was suddenly cancelled, many Deadliest Catch fans began asking the same question. Had the show finally reached the end of its journey? For several years, the series had been built around one dangerous mission: brave fishermen battling the harsh waters of the Bering Sea in search of valuable snow crab and red king crab. The freezing temperatures, powerful storms, and unpredictable ocean conditions were all part of the excitement. But without the crabs that made the series famous, many wondered what story was left to tell. How could a show about crab fishing continue when the crabs were no longer available? Instead of giving up, the producers made a bold decision. Season 19 would continue, but the captains would have to completely change the way they worked. The familiar race for snow crab and red king crab was replaced with new challenges as they explored other opportunities, including golden king crab, Bering crab, and cod fishing. However, adapting was far from easy. These fishermen had spent years, and in some cases decades, perfecting their skills in specific fisheries. They knew the waters, understood the habits of their target species, and built their businesses around those catches. Now, they were forced to step into unfamiliar territory and learn new techniques, use different equipment, and adjust their entire strategies. Captain Sig Hansen and the crew of the Northwestern made one of the most dramatic decisions. Instead of staying in familiar waters, they took a massive risk by traveling all the way to Norway to search for red king crab in a different environment. The move required major preparation, new regulations to understand, and the courage to start over in unfamiliar waters. Captain Josh Harris of the Cornelia Marie faced his own difficult challenge. Following in the footsteps of his legendary father, Phil Harris, was already a huge responsibility. But with the crab shutdown changing the industry, Josh had to create a new path and prove that the Cornelia Marie could survive beyond the fishing legacy that made it famous. In the end, the crisis transformed Deadliest Catch into something different. It was no longer just a show about chasing valuable crab. It became a powerful story about resilience, change, and fishermen fighting to survive when the world they knew suddenly disappeared. The crew of Deadliest Catch explored other options when they were prevented from hunting red king crab, yet the results were not comparable to what they had before. But what other factors contributed to the struggles of the show beyond the sea? And how much did they affect the unity among the crew members? Let's find out. The behind-the-scenes battle. While fishermen were battling the disappearance of crab in the waters of the Bering Sea, Deadliest Catch was facing another serious storm far away from the ocean. Behind the cameras, the show itself was dealing with internal conflicts that threatened some of the relationships and personalities that helped make the series successful. One of the biggest controversies involved the Hillstrand brothers, Jonathan and Andy, the legendary captains of the Time Bandit. For years, the brothers had been among the most recognizable faces on the show. Their humor, fearless attitude, and unique approach to fishing made them fan favorites and turned their boat into one of the most iconic vessels in the series. However, their relationship with Discovery Channel eventually became complicated. The network filed a lawsuit against the brothers over a planned spin-off project called Hillstranded, claiming they failed to complete their agreement. Discovery reportedly sought millions of dollars in damages, turning what began as a television disagreement into a much larger legal battle. For the Hillstrands, the situation was not just about a show or a contract. Their fishing boat represented their entire livelihood. The Time Bandit was more than a television attraction. It was a working business that supported crew members, families, and years of hard work. Losing the legal battle could have threatened everything they had built. As tensions increased, the brothers made the difficult decision to step away from Deadliest Catch. Their departure immediately shocked viewers who had followed their journey for years. But the situation became even more serious when Captain Sig Hansen of the Northwestern, one of the biggest stars and most respected figures on the show, showed his support for the Hillstrands and also stepped away during the dispute. Suddenly, it seemed like Deadliest Catch was facing a crisis from every direction. The crabs were disappearing from the ocean. The fishing industry was under pressure, and some of the show's most important personalities were walking away from the cameras. Yet the problems surrounding the series were not only about money, contracts, or business decisions. Behind every captain and every boat was a real person dealing with real struggles. And soon, the show would face a tragedy that reminded everyone that life on and off the water could change in an instant. Aside from the fact that a legal battle among the Deadliest Catch crew members threatened the continuation of the show, what other emotional challenge affected one of its members? And were the other crew members able to manage the loss without feeling the negative impact of it? Let's uncover the emotional details. The tragedy that changed Deadliest Catch forever. Long before the crab population crisis threatened the future of Deadliest Catch, the series experienced one of its most emotional and unforgettable moments when it lost one of its most beloved captains. Captain Phil Harris was not just another fisherman on the show. As the captain of the Cornelia Marie, he became one of the most recognizable and respected figures in the series. Fans connected with him because he was honest, outspoken, hardworking, and deeply loyal to the people around him. Whether he was leading his crew through dangerous waters or sharing moments with his sons, Phil brought a human side to the harsh world of commercial fishing. In February 2010, everything changed. Phil suffered a massive stroke while working aboard the Cornelia Marie and passed away at only 53 years old. His sudden death shocked everyone who knew him.
911, what's your emergency?
I think my dad had a stroke.
From his fellow fishermen to the millions of viewers who had followed his journey on television. For many fans, Phil was much more than a reality TV personality. He represented the spirit of Deadliest Catch. His struggles, victories, and relationship with his family had become one of the most emotional storylines in the show's history. Viewers had watched his sons, Josh and Jake Harris, grow up on screen, making Phil's journey feel personal to many people watching from home. After his father's passing, Josh Harris eventually took over command of the Cornelia Marie. But becoming a captain was not just about taking control of a famous fishing boat. He also carried the enormous responsibility of living up to the reputation of a man many considered a legend. Then, the fishing industry began changing. Josh was no longer simply trying to continue his father's legacy. He was facing a completely different world where traditional methods were being challenged. Crab populations were declining, and the future of the industry had become uncertain. Phil's death also changed the emotional direction of Deadliest Catch. The series became more than a story about dangerous waters and valuable catches. It became a reminder of family, friendship, sacrifice, and the risks these fishermen faced every day. The captains learned that survival was not only about bringing home a profitable catch, it was also about protecting the people standing beside them when the ocean became unpredictable. The death of one of the captains of Deadliest Catch contributed to the emotional struggles surrounding the show. But was there ever a time when there was hope for the return of the series? If so, what other challenges did the show face? And what harsh reality were the crew members left to confront? Let's uncover the details. The second shutdown that revealed a bigger problem. When officials made the painful decision to cancel the crab season, many fishermen and industry leaders believed the shutdown would only be a short-term setback. They hoped the break would give the crab population enough time to recover and allow the industry to return stronger. However, those hopes quickly faded when the following year brought another shocking announcement. The snow crab season was canceled again, revealing that the crisis was far more serious than anyone expected. For fishermen who had spent their lives depending on the Bering Sea, the second shutdown was a painful reminder that the problem was much bigger than anyone originally expected. This was no longer just a short break to help the population rebuild. The crabs were not returning as quickly as scientists had hoped, and concerns about the future of the fishery continued to grow. Researchers began realizing that the changes happening beneath the ocean surface could have long-lasting effects. The Bering Sea, once known as one of the world's richest crab fishing areas, was experiencing major environmental shifts. The cold conditions that allowed snow crab populations to thrive were becoming less predictable, creating uncertainty for both the animals and the people who depended on them. However, not all the news was negative. In 2023, a small ray of hope finally appeared when the Bristol Bay Red King crab fishery was reopened after signs showed the population had improved enough to allow limited fishing. For many fishermen, the decision offered reassurance that recovery was possible when nature was given time to heal. However, the situation remained uncertain because the snow crab population continued facing serious challenges. The situation made one thing clear for Deadliest Catch captains and the entire fishing industry. The old way of doing business had changed forever. The days when fishermen could rely on the same crab seasons year after year were no longer guaranteed. Survival now required flexibility, patience, and the willingness to explore new opportunities. The captains who once built their careers around chasing the most valuable crab species had to accept a difficult reality. The future of fishing would not look like the past, and those who wanted to survive would have to adapt to a new and uncertain ocean. Hope was high that the season of Deadliest Catch would be reopened until it faced another shutdown. But what became of the crew members away from the popular series they were known for? Were they able to pursue similar careers elsewhere? Or did most of them leave the series and the fishing profession completely? Let's find out. The captains who faced life beyond Deadliest Catch. More than 2 decades after Deadliest Catch introduced millions of viewers to the dangerous reality of crab fishing, the fishermen who built the show's legacy have experienced different journeys, with some continuing at sea, while others explored new paths beyond the cameras. For some fishermen, life continued on the unpredictable waters they had always known, but for others, leaving the spotlight of television became a turning point, leading them toward new businesses, personal transformations, and a more peaceful life away from public attention. Captain Scott Campbell Jr. is one example of a fisherman who had to change direction after an unexpected challenge. After a serious back injury forced him to step away from the demanding world of commercial fishing, he did not allow the setback to end his journey. Instead, he focused on building new opportunities outside the industry and explored entrepreneurship as a different way to create success. Andy Hillstrand, one half of the famous Hillstrand brothers, also chose a different lifestyle after years in front of the cameras. As captain of the legendary Time Bandit, Andy became one of the most recognizable figures on Deadliest Catch. However, after years of dangerous seasons and television attention, he eventually stepped away from the spotlight and embraced a quieter life away from reality TV. Meanwhile, Captain Wild Bill Wiekrowski continued facing challenges both on and off the water. Known for his tough personality and unforgettable moments on the show, Bill experienced a major health battle after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. After successful treatment and recovery, he later revealed plans to retire from fishing and explore new adventures beyond the industry. Sean Dwyer represented a younger generation of fishermen who brought fresh energy to the series. Although he eventually moved away from Deadliest Catch, fishing remained an important part of his identity and career. However, not every exit from the show happened by choice. Edgar Hansen, once a familiar face on the Northwestern and a longtime member of the crew, left the series after a criminal case involving allegations of sexual misconduct. Following the case, he largely stepped away from public life.
What you're missing is the fact that you lost a lot of years because you're all screwing up, right?
Their stories reveal that life after reality television can look very different for everyone. Some find new success, some seek peace away from cameras, and others face challenges that completely change their future. Most of the Deadliest Catch stars who helped build the show's legacy eventually explored different paths when the foundation of the series was disrupted. But were these changes the reason some crew members stepped away from the show? Or did they simply reinvent themselves beyond the cameras to continue surviving in a changing world? Let's delve into the details. The discovery that changed Deadliest Catch forever. The shocking discovery that threatened Deadliest Catch went far beyond the disappearance of crabs. The real crisis was that an entire lifestyle, industry, and community built around those valuable creatures had suddenly been forced to change in ways nobody expected. For decades, fishermen, families, and communities depended on the Bering Sea, providing the same valuable species year after year. The captains built their careers around specific fishing methods. Boats were designed for certain seasons, and the television series itself became famous because of the dangerous search for snow crab and red king crab. But when the ocean changed, everything connected to it had to change as well. The survival of Deadliest Catch came from its ability to become something much bigger than a simple fishing show. Instead of only documenting the race for a valuable catch, the series began telling a deeper story about human determination, uncertainty, and the struggle to continue when the future becomes unpredictable. The captains who once mastered one type of fishing had to learn completely new techniques. They had to understand different species, explore unfamiliar opportunities, and adjust to challenges they never expected to face. Boats that had spent years following the same routes were forced to travel into new waters in search of a way to survive. For many fishermen, this was more than a business decision. It was about protecting their crews, supporting their families, and keeping alive a lifestyle that had been passed down through generations. The crab shutdown exposed a reality that many viewers rarely see on television. Life cannot always be planned or controlled, and unexpected challenges can change everything. The ocean follows its own rules, regardless of experience, fame, or past success. Even the most respected captains, with years of knowledge and skill, discovered that they could not control nature or simply bring back the world they once knew. However, the crisis revealed the true strength of the people behind Deadliest Catch. When the world they depended on suddenly changed, they faced uncertainty but refused to give up. Instead of walking away, they embraced new challenges, learned different methods, explored fresh opportunities, and proved that survival often requires courage, flexibility, and determination. They searched for new opportunities, accepted difficult changes, and proved that survival is not always about controlling the situation. Sometimes, it is about having the courage to change when the world around you changes first. The shutdown of the crab season behind Deadliest Catch proved that nature can force decisions nobody is prepared for. But what did the crisis reveal about the fishermen, the industry, and the show itself? And what legacy did Deadliest Catch leave behind? Let's uncover the details. The future of Deadliest Catch after the crab crisis. Today, Deadliest Catch remains one of Discovery Channel's most recognizable and longest-running programs, but the story behind the series is no longer the same as when it first began. What started as a television show about brave fishermen risking everything in the dangerous waters of the Bering Sea became something much bigger. It became a real-life example of how fragile the relationship between people and nature can be. For years, the fishermen believed they understood the ocean. They knew the seasons, studied the waters, and built their entire lives around the belief that the crab would always be there. But nature had a different plan. The sudden disappearance of snow crab and the shutdown of major fishing seasons forced everyone involved to face an uncertain future. Fishermen who had spent decades mastering their craft had to accept that experience alone was no longer enough. They had to explore new fishing methods, target different species, and find new ways to keep their boats running and their crews employed. At the same time, scientists were forced to search for answers. They had to understand what caused such a dramatic decline and whether the crab populations could ever return to the levels fishermen once depended on. The collapse became a reminder that changes beneath the ocean surface could affect thousands of lives above it. Even Deadliest Catch itself had to evolve. A show that was once defined by the pursuit of king crab and snow crab had to become a story about adaptation, determination, and survival. The cameras were no longer only following fishermen chasing a valuable catch. They were documenting real people facing a crisis they could not control and finding ways to continue despite overwhelming challenges. The biggest question is no longer simply whether the crabs will return. The bigger question is whether the fishing industry can continue adapting as the world around it changes. The true legacy of Deadliest Catch goes far beyond dangerous waters, massive waves, or the success of a profitable fishing season. At its heart, the series tells a deeper story about resilience, determination, and the human ability to survive when everything familiar suddenly changes. It shows the courage required to adapt, embrace new challenges, and keep moving forward when old ways are no longer enough. Most importantly, it reveals how ordinary people react when the foundation of their lives suddenly disappears, forcing them to face uncertainty, adapt to change, and discover strength they never knew they had. The ocean took away what they knew, but it also revealed something powerful. Survival does not always belong to those who avoid change. It belongs to those who learn how to face it. So, what do you think about the Deadliest Catch crisis? Was shutting down the crab season the right decision? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.